Well, hey, welcome. Happy Friday to everyone out there. Welcome to another edition of AP Micro Review. Today, we're going to get started with the free response I left you guys off with yesterday. So here's the deal with today and Monday. For those of you who are watching, there's nothing exciting about cost curves. You really can't make these that great. That being said, don't you dare hit the off button, because boy, oh boy, if you look back at the last 20 years of free response, what is one thing that's always on there? Some type of cost curves, market structure, questions about why cost curves are shaped the way they are. If you're going to really focus on something, this upcoming week is really what you're going to, there's going to be questions about this stuff. So it starts today. So once again, welcome back. My name is Matt Pedlow, teaching up here in Chelsea, Michigan. And starting off with us today, I know we have the free response that hopefully you got to. It's this one right here, which deals with the agro island and the price of wheat. So let's go ahead and get started on this one. Why don't I go ahead and draw what the graph is going to look like, and then we'll go back and figure this out. So hopefully you guys had a chance to get this done. So it says the price of wheat is $10 per bushel. It is being produced in a competitive industry. Oops, sorry about that. And let's do this. Let me draw. There we go. Okay, so if you look back at the question here, it says, small country, wheat's $10. Draw the correct labeled graph, show the equilibrium price of $10. So anytime it's going to tell you, right, always look. I know you're not going to have to graph, but always look and make sure you're paying attention if they give you prices, because there's probably going to be some math involved. And then quantity, it says Q star, so hopefully you drew that. A domestic producer surplus shaded completely. So remember, it's everything under the price to the supply curve. These producers are willing to supply at this price, but they're getting this price. So shaded completely, right? Just means you hit every spot of that. Don't leave any of it blank. There we go. And then it says on the graph, show each of the following. If they engage in free trade, the world price is now 20. So what we talked about yesterday, if the world price is higher than the domestic price, they're going to export the good. So obviously you're going to put a $20 price above 10 anyways. Here's your new line. There you go. There's your trade graph. It says quantity of wheat supplied by domestic producers. Don't get confused. Remember, consumers are demanding the wheat. Producers are supplying. So stay on this till hit your supply. So your quantity supplied is what the producers, and it says label it QP. So there you go. Hopefully you have that point. And then it says show the domestic consumer surplus after trade. Label it CS and shade it. So maybe you do that, and then you just shade it like this, right? Try not to go out of lines, but as I said earlier, right, you're not going to graph that. So there's your consumer surplus now. And then it says given your answer. So now that we're done with the graph, hopefully your graph looks like that. Not too tricky a one. So hopefully you guys got that. And then let's share this back here. Okay, it says, given your answer, how does each of the following change if they engage in trade? Domestic consumer surplus, well, clearly, you can see what happened. It got much smaller, so that decreased. And then domestic producer surplus is, in fact, going to increase. It'd be that huge triangle there, because they're going to export what we don't want. Okay, trade graphs. I tend to think of them as some of the easier graphs to know in econ and Mike. I think if you guys see a trade graph, you should be really happy about that. As long as you know the points, talk about the tariff especially. So a question, would we tariff exports? Well, no, we, the United States, wouldn't tariff our own exports. We don't put taxes on goods. Other countries can tariff us. But if you're gonna look at those imports, know where that tariff box goes, okay, the tax revenue. So today, we're gonna talk about the production function and all of our costs. We're gonna look at why they're shaped the way they are, why they slope, all those kind of things, why they move. Important stuff. So let's get Boogie in here. First thing, the production function is the relationship between the inputs and the outputs, basically. What are the inputs? Well, to make it easy, labor. And what is marginal product? It is the increase in output that arises from each additional unit or each additional worker. So here's, I just took one Number of workers, potatoes, okay? This is an old question here. So the first worker, right? And obviously if you don't have any workers, there is no product. There's no workers to make it. You hire a worker, they harvest 3 potatoes. Now let's use some common sense here and think about this for a second. If you hire a second worker, would they produce just 3? Would they produce 6? Well, they should probably produce more than 6, because now instead of one person taking the shovel or the pitchfork and digging around the potatoes and lifting it up, maybe one person takes the fork and they're in the ground and the other person is lifting the potato up, and now together they make 7. Good, that should happen. You hire a third worker. Notice what happens. The total amount of potatoes is only 10. Why didn't it increase exponentially again? Well, one person's got the pitchfork, they're going around, the other person's lifting the potato. What's the third person doing? What are they there for, moral support? You hire a fourth person, now they only harvest 12 potatoes. You hire a fifth person, only 1 more potato. You hire a sixth person, and now there's actually negative marginal product. So kids oftentimes say, I didn't think marginal product could be negative. Well, sure it could. What would that sixth person do? Honestly, what are they going to hold one end of the shovel? Are they going to hold the person's arm as they lift potatoes? Are they going to dust the potatoes off? There's nothing for these people to do. So you guys are going to see this when we graph this. You guys could see this at your work, and we'll talk about that today, because a lot of like teenage jobs, you'll sometimes see what arises, the problem. So if we graph these numbers right here, nothing tricky, a production function, simple, it's inputs and outputs. And those of you who are, even when I teach, I ask my students before I graph this, what do you think it would look like? And a lot of kids say, well, maybe like this, right? As you hire, they're just going to keep doing the same amount, but a lot of kids are like, no, that probably wouldn't happen. Maybe it flattens out. So look what happens to your total product curve. It increases really high, and then by the third worker, it starts leveling off, and then it actually decreases, okay? So you guys understand why each worker is making more, but as you go on, each additional worker makes less than the previous worker hired. And so now we did the marginal product. Let's go ahead and graph the marginal product on this graph over here. And it's the black line. So there's a marginal product graph. And then in red, I just graphed the average product. No, I didn't have to do the math, right? I can just do the math in my head, 3 divided by 1 and 7 divided by 2 and so on and so forth. And you'll notice the average product, kind of the same thing. But what's important on here, much more important, is that marginal product line. Because 2 things about this. This is very important. This would be a wonderful question on the free response, because it would really start splitting the 5s and 4s. 4s are kids who understand how to draw. They look at a total product market, right? And they're like, oh yeah, the production function, I get that. There's our total product we make. A 5 says, I can talk to you about margin product. There's 2 things I want you to understand. So if you're taking these down, 2 facts here. Number 1, total product is maximized when marginal product is at 0. Because think about that. If I hire a worker and they make me an additional 1 potato, which was between 12 and 13, it's still increasing. If I hire the next worker and now all together they only make 12, that worker made negative marginal product. So I was maximized when that worker, if I had hired a worker and they made 0, right here. The other thing I want you to understand, okay? So that's key. Total product is maximized when marginal product is 0. The second thing is, this margin product line is going to look familiar in a second, because we're going to flip it upside down. Okay? In essence, it's a mirror image of what we're going to call marginal cost. So for those of you who this is a little bit of review, if you think about your marginal cost, and yes, I fully realize that in intro econ, even in college, a lot of kids say, is that the swoosh, the Nike swoosh looking curve? Well, kind of. You don't want to draw it like that. Sometimes marginal cost is constant, but notice with this one right here, first worker, our marginal product went up, and then each additional worker started making less than the previous until it was actually negative. So what happened with our cost? My cost was falling when I hired that second worker. They made more than the first worker. So in essence, it was cheaper for me. But what happens is each additional worker started costing more and more. Okay. So 2 facts about that marginal product curve that are important. And then the key here. So I want to go through our cost really quick. We're not going to get too mathy. Some of this should be kind of common sense. So we know fixed costs are costs that don't change with the rate of production. What is an example of a fixed cost? You're paying rent, your salaries. So a lot of you guys know, right? The difference between a salary and a wage. A salary is per year. We'll just keep it easy like that. So you get a fixed amount of money per year. So teachers, let's say they're paid on a salary. If your teacher gets to work an hour early and stays an hour late, right? Do they get paid for that? No. So they're not like punching in on a time card, where a wage is an hourly payment. So if you work more hours, you get paid more money, okay? So those are fixed costs. Rents. Every month, I pay the exact same amount in the short run, okay? Variable costs are costs that do change. They vary. So something like wages or utilities. When would your utility bill be the highest? Well, probably if you're anywhere in the south or on the western coast there, anywhere southern half of the country, right? Probably July. January here in LA, you're cracking those windows open. What does it get down to 67 degrees? But maybe you're in Phoenix and it's 118 degrees in July and you're cranking the AC. So your variable costs are going to be really high for those months. And flip-flop that if you're up here in Michigan. And a few years ago, we had a number of snow days. Why? I think 4 or 5 of the days off. And for any of you in the north, this is going to be like, yeah, we get it. For any of you in the south, you can be like, you've got to be kidding me, because we hit negative 20 degrees or negative 20 wind chill, and kids can't be out at bus stops. And I said negative 20. I know you're going to say people live in this. If I'm looking out my window right now, it's still snowing. It's been snowing all day. It is April something, 17th, I think, and we've got 2 inches of snow. So this is somewhat uncommon, but it happens. So those are variable costs. Up here in the winter, our costs are very high to run businesses because you're paying all those utilities. And then the key concept today, we are going to go back to this over and over. It's called diminishing marginal returns. So here's the definition. Your teacher might have given you a different definition. Don't really care if they ask you about diminishing marginal returns in the AP test. What's key is you must say that there's a fixed input and variable inputs. That's typically what the rubric looks for, the readers are looking for. So here's an easy way to say this. If at least one input is held fixed, while other inputs are variable, output increases at a decreasing rate. So that's kind of the easy way to say this. So let's go back over this for a minute. If at least one input is held fixed while other inputs are variable, your output increases at a decreasing rate. It's called diminishing marginal returns. When I teach macro to my kids, I always tell them what I love about macro is you can go home, flip on the ABC World News, and I mean, my goodness, today, right? Economy. It's all macro stuff. Unemployment rate, GDP, inflation, Federal Reserve policy, fiscal monetary policy. Micro, most of the time, you don't hear a lot about what I've taught you guys so far on the news. They don't start a story with moral hazard. A lot of times in sports, they actually say things about diminishing marginal returns. Sometimes the sportscasts are even correct when they're saying about it. And so this is one of those terms you'll hear outside of an economics classroom. So your teachers, if they used an example for this, a demonstration, here's a couple things they could do. Let's say they made little greeting cards, okay? And they had a kid come up on the desk, clear the desk off. They had a piece of, piece of paper, okay? And they said, all right, here's what you're gonna do. Fold it in half. You're going to take a, Sharpie, you're going to draw a smiley face, and then you're going to, staple it, do something like that, okay? And you have a stapler, one marker, and one pair of scissors, go. And they give them like a minute, okay? The kid does whatever he has to do, cuts it in half, whatever, and gets like 4 done. And they hire a second kid, together they make 10. They hire the third kid, now they make like 18. They're roaring. One kid's stapling, one kid is cutting, one kid's drawing. Then they hire the fourth kid. And immediately you see the wheels start clicking with students because they realize what's happening. That fourth kid that has no job. So maybe that fourth kid folds the paper and holds it. Then you hire the fifth kid. Then you hire the sixth kid. Now I tried this in class this year. I hired the second kid. He didn't do very well. But the idea of diminishing marginal returns is I'm holding the resources fixed. What's variable? Labor. What's fixed? The stapler, the scissors. And so what do kids say? Please, come on, Padlo, give us more staplers, give us more scissors. Well, no, I'm trying to teach you something, right? Maybe your teachers had 2 buckets on the side of the room and made kids run back and forth with tennis balls, which I've always liked that one too. Sometimes they'll do this in lecture halls at college and get a ton of kids on stage. And how do you get a tennis ball from one to the other? And right, you can't throw it, you got to run it. And then you add a second kid and they hand off and that kid goes back and forth. You get a third and that kid, now there's not much to do. And then you get 30 people and it's got to touch every hand and that tennis ball takes forever. Diminishing marginal returns. Important, important, important. Okay, so where does diminishing returns occur if you're looking at like a production function for this? So here's your inputs, here's your labor, and here's your product. So once again, what did I tell you guys? Anytime on an AP test, you see a column of total something, whatever that total is, you want a marginal something next to it. So total product, you want a marginal product. So in this case, you went from 10 to 22. So your marginal product is 12. What does that mean? I heard the second worker, they made me an additional 12 units. The third worker, I went from 22 to 40, 18, 40 to 60, 60 to 68. Let's stop there for a minute. So I heard the first worker, they made me 12 additional. I heard the second worker, they made me 12 additional. I heard the third worker, they went from 22 up to 40. So that third worker made me an additional 18. I heard the fourth worker, now those four workers made 60 together. So that fourth worker made me an additional 20. But when I heard the fifth worker, they only made me 8 more. So that's how you tell where diminishing marginal returns are occurring. When your marginal product falls, then you see diminishing marginal returns. Okay, so if we went down, you could see, man, you would never want to hire that 10th worker. Terrible. So if you see a question like this on the thing, it's the same thing. What do you do? Make a marginal product column. So it says, what is the maximum number of workers they can hire before diminishing marginal returns? You hire the first worker, they make 10. Hire the second worker, they make 15 more. Difference between 10 and 25. You hire the third worker, they only make 10 more. So the answer is, what is the maximum number before? So it'd be 2 workers. After that, diminishing returns, marginal returns. Okay, so that you just make your marginal product. Anytime you see a column, you guys have time to sketch this out really quick on the AP test. And let's get a little further the cost, because now we got to talk about the important one, like the really important one. It's called marginal cost. So if you're doing this in your notes, marginal cost, anytime you see marginal, right? I always tell my students use the word additional twice in your definition. So it's the additional cost from hiring each additional unit of labor. Okay, it's the additional cost from hiring each additional unit of labor. That's what a marginal cost is. I hire a worker. What is my additional cost to hire that worker? So if you have to do some math and it's an imperfectly competitive firm, it's the change in total cost over the change in quantity. Now, right, if you have these numbers and it says 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, you can just do the subtraction I did. Okay, so just keep an eye on that. It's kind of a little more in depth. So marginal cost, right? It's change in total cost over change in quantity. To get the margin, you're always dividing by the change in quantity. And then total cost, fixed plus variable. So remember, your fixed cost, your rent, plus your variable cost, your wages, you add those up and businesses know what their total cost is. So far, so good. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about profit next week. You got to know these. It's like the underlying, we're building a vehicle right here, and this is the wheels and the steel and everything to hold it in. This is a whole basis of this. You have to understand these things. Average fixed cost is simply fixed cost divided by quantity. So what is my average fixed cost? So my fixed cost is fixed, but average fixed cost is not. So important to understand when you talk about these cost curves, which I'm going to show you in a minute, what happens to average fixed cost? Think about this. Let's say it cost me, I'm going to make glasses, okay, in my factory, and my fixed cost, you add up like my rent and my salary to my executives and things like that, and I know all my fixed cost, and you add them up, and it's $1 million a month, big factory. So if I only make 1 glass at the end of that year or the end of the month, the average fixed cost for this was $1 million. Probably not going to be very profitable. However, if I make 1 million glasses, my average fixed cost goes all the way down to $1, right? So what does your average fixed cost look like? It just falls in your curve because you're dividing by a higher and higher quantity. So know that, understand that idea of average fixed cost. Average variable cost is your variable cost divided by your quantity, right? And you guys know how to get averages. This is nothing tricky. And then average total cost is your average fixed cost plus your average variable cost. So if you have to figure those out, that's how you get your average total cost, okay? Or total cost divided by quantity to get the average, okay? Man, oh man, a couple of these slides that I've done in the last few weeks, if I could just like freeze and say to you, just memorize this. It's so important that you understand why things are going to look the way they are based on these averages. So let's do another question real quick. A firm is producing 100 units of output at a total cost of $400. Their average variable cost is 3. What is the firm's fixed cost? All right, so they're going to make you do a little bit of math. If your average variable cost is $3 per unit and you're making 100 units, then your total variable cost is 3 times 100, $300. If your total cost is 4, then total cost minus your total variable cost leaves you with total fixed cost. I am not doing anything tricky right now. So if you're like, oh God, fixed and variable cost, why? It's simple. Total cost, right? Fixed plus variable equals total. So 100 plus 300 would equal 400. So your firm's total fixed cost would be $100. And then let's do this because this one's a little more in depth. I tried to get one that was a little bit trickier. So this, and I will say this, the one thing with you guys, I know there was so much chatter out there with kids saying, oh, I hate free response and multiple choice, my bread and butter. Are you kidding? Test fatigue. You get to questions like this on micro and your brain, right? Oh God, there's been so many numbers and they're throwing numbers. Sometimes they matter, sometimes they don't. To me, free response is it's the beautiful thing of this, right? You get to, sketch out these graphs and then say, this is why this is doing this and this is why this looks like this. Question like this, if there were numbers or like a chart on your free response and it said, here's all your information, figure this out, they could without question ask you a question like this, even though it's written as a multiple choice now. So your total fixed costs are $46. Okay, let's start there. Okay, we'll make this easy. Now, your average product labor is 5 units when 10 units are produced. So what does that mean? Every time I produce 10 units, on average, each unit of labor can make 5. So how many workers did it take to produce 10? 5 times 2 is 10. So I need 2 workers to make those 10 units. That's important, okay? Last piece of information here, the wage rate is $12. That's important as well because now if I need 2 workers, then my total labor costs are $24, 2 times 12. So when I'm making 10 units, my average product of labor, meaning how many workers is 5, and I'm making 10, so it took me 2 workers. Their wage is $12, so 2 times 12 is 24. Go back to your fixed cost because 24 plus 46 equals $70. We're almost done, but it says what is the average total cost? Total cost divided by quantity. When I'm making 10 units of output, 70 divided by 10 is ding, 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 $7. You guys see how I did that? So you had to figure out it's 2 workers, 2 times 12 is 24. That's the total labor cost, your variable cost. Fixed cost of 46. 46 plus 24 equals 70. And then you just get the average divided by how much you're producing quantity. Okay. And then, so that's, I know on the AP test, I won't be there to draw these with you and write all this information, but you guys are smart kids. So the shape of cost curves, let's talk a little bit about this handsome fellow, Larry Bird. All of you Bostonians certainly know this man. There's a reason he's on here, okay? And no, it's not to make fun of his shorts. So let's talk about first marginal cost. Marginal cost typically falls at first, just like the potatoes. 1 worker, they make 3. I hire 2 workers together, they make 7. It means on average, they made 3.5. That's driving my cost down. But then diminishing marginal returns. Hire the 3rd worker, and maybe they only make like 9 together, so that's only 3. So now they're making less per worker, and it starts driving my cost up. Okay, remember it, that mirror image of marginal product. Average fixed cost, they decline throughout the entire thing. So they're going to keep falling as you produce more because you're dividing by a larger and larger number. Here's the important thing, average variable and average total, because both of the same things happen. Okay. If, and this question gets asked all the time, if marginal cost is below your average variable cost or your average total cost, then your average, let's just stick with the average variable right now. Okay. The same thing, but let's just stick with, doesn't matter. If marginal cost is below average variable cost must be falling. As soon as it goes above it, it drives it up. Here's Larry Bird. Okay. Larry Bird shot a career 89% free throw shooter. That's not bad, right? You want someone who's shooting 90%. A little bit better than some of the other people you've seen in the past shooting foul shots. Let's say Bird on average is 89%. Goes out, gets fouled, shoots 10 foul shots, hits 80%. So at the margin, his next additional game, he shot 80%. What happened to his average? It fell. Because at the margin, if it's below, it's going to pull his average down. Next game he goes out playing the Lakers, it's the 86. Well, Lakers didn't make the 86 finals, very sad. So it's whatever year you want to choose, early 80s, Boston, 85. And he goes out and he shoots 100%. Now, what is that going to do to his average? So at the addition, his marginal cost is higher, it's going to pull it up. And I'm going to show you these cost curves in a second. The way you guys can think about this is some of you are so attached to this with your grades, right? Which I'm so opposed to, but for a myriad of reasons. A number of you guys, every time a teacher puts a grade in, you get a little thing on your phone. And what are you doing? What are you noticing? What's happening to your average? So the next additional test, right? At the margin, the next test you take, if it's above your average, it pulls your average up. It has to mathematically. So let's look at what these are going to look like. So if you need to draw these, I want you to pay attention to a couple things when you draw these. So price, quantity, the usual. Marginal cost falls a little bit and then starts increasing, right? It's tough to draw on Microsoft PowerPoint. That's why it doesn't look great. And then average total cost, average variable cost. Notice two things. Number one, notice how average variable cost is getting closer to average total cost. That's important. But what is very important here, the most important thing here, notice that marginal cost goes through the very bottom of both of these curves. Why? If you're at the margin below your average, it will pull your average down. And then as soon as it goes above, it'll pull your average up. So here's what you need to know, okay? Number one, pause this, memorize this, understand this. It is going to be most likely asked on your free response coming on May 20th. Number two, know that average variable cost gets closer to average total cost as your quantity is increasing, okay? Starts pretty far out here. And as we make more and more, it starts getting closer and closer and closer, because if your average fixed costs look like this the whole way down, they just keep falling, right? I didn't draw them on here because I didn't want to muddle this up and confuse you. But if your average fixed costs just keep getting lower and lower and lower and lower, then if you add them to average variable cost, if you produce more, they're going to get closer together. Number three, most important thing, diminishing margin returns is seen right here, okay? That's where you're going to see it. Why is that? Because it's where your marginal cost curve starts increasing. So notice these two are getting closer, and then big thing, notice that's where diminishing margin returns is seen. So your costs are falling and then start increasing. Know this, learn it, memorize it, whatever you have to do, okay? Really important stuff that you guys understand this. And then last thing on here, okay, your marginal cost curve, so we don't have a demand curve on this yet. That's going to be on Tuesday. But this is still, it's a firm. They have to have supply and demand curves, and they do. The supply curve is your marginal cost curve. We've talked about that before, okay? It's just, but where? Is it the whole thing? No. Your marginal cost curve above average variable cost is your short run supply curve. What does that mean? That means if I'm supplying right here, right, at this price, that means it's below my average total cost. So I ask students all the time, are there firms out there that are selling the good for less than it costs to make? And every kid says, oh, of course not. Have you heard of JCPenney, Sears, Kmart? Right now, every airline, I mean, right now, pretty much every business that's still operating, not every, right? But a lot of businesses that are operating are restaurants that are doing takeout, right? You can't tell me they're paying their rent, they're paying all those, that they're making enough to make their costs. They're probably not. They're just trying to, at the margin, get enough money to potentially pay wages. But in the long run, your supply curve is your marginal cost curve that starts from here and up. Why? Because I can lose money in the short run as a business owner. I can't lose money in the long run. And what does that mean? It means that this year I'm going to lose money. All right, I dip into my savings. Next year I lose money. I dip into my savings. Third year, I'm done. My savings are gone. I can't even pay my workers, right? I've lost so much money. So that's why the long run supply curve is your marginal cost above average total cost. So let's say you get to a free response that looks just like this. Okay, we got two more free response and we're going to be done. So identify the cost curves. Believe it or not, this was an actual free response question. Do I think it'll be something you'll see in May? Probably not, probably too easy. But curve one, so that's our marginal cost curve. Just literally looked at that. So hopefully you got that one. Curve 2. So if you have two curves on here, average variable is going to be below because average variable plus average fixed, so equals average total. Average variable has to be below. So curve 2 is your average total cost, and curve 3 is your average variable cost, right? B, explain why curve 1 initially decreases and then increases. Okay, let's skip to B2 for a second. We've talked about this today. Why does curve 1 increase? Why does your marginal cost curve increase? Because of diminishing marginal returns. So why would it decrease at first? And if you say like, because we heard the second worker and they were better, well, that's not a good explanation. So if it's diminishing marginal returns that causes it to increase, guess what? It would be increasing marginal returns that makes it fall. What is increasing marginal returns? Well, it's just the opposite of diminishing marginal returns. Each additional worker I hire makes more additional output. They're making more than the person before them. So that's why my costs fall. And then C, what measure of cost, where I said this one, is the distance between 2 and 3, average fixed cost. D, why does that decrease? Because your average fixed cost gets spread over a larger quantity. So, right, we just got done talking about that. Average fixed costs will keep falling, so they're going to keep getting closer and closer and closer and closer. And E, identify 2 points on the short run supply curve. So remember, in your short run, it's your marginal cost curve above average variable. So K and L would be the only 2 points in that marginal cost curve, right? J, no. You would not open. You can't even pay your workers. We're going to talk more about that next week. Okay. One last multiple choice question. I believe this is the last one. Yep. So the graph, excuse me, the graph above shows the cost curves for a competitive firm that produces 20 units of output. Here we are in the graph. What are the total costs and total fixed cost? Okay. Once again, fixed cost, your average fixed cost is not shown on this graph. Never. So don't say, well, I don't know. Let's work through this. So if you see a free response to something like this, like I keep telling you, what are they asking? What do they want me to know, right? It's two different things here. So what are they asking? Well, they're asking, how do I get total cost, but I only see average. All right, so what do they want me to know? They want you to figure out how to get from an average to a total. So if I produce 20, and on average, each whatever output I'm making here, it doesn't say, each unit cost me $6. How did I get that? Because I just went up to my average total cost and over, okay? So if it's 6 times 20, then my total cost would be $120. All right, when I produce 20 units. And then my average variable cost is $5. So that means 5 times 20 is $100. So my total costs are 120, my variable costs are 100. What's the difference between them? 20 bucks. And what must that be? My total fixed cost. Okay, so that would be C. And if you can do that, like question like that, and it's like, I know that's a little easier than the earlier one, but if you can do these and you're like, yeah, these make sense, then that's perfect. Okay, last thing for today, why does a marginal cost curve shift? Important stuff. So it shifts when a variable cost changes or there's a per unit tax or a per unit subsidy. It does not. So if a variable cost increases or there's a per unit tax, marginal cost actually shifts up. It goes directly up. And then if let's say your workers get more productive, okay, that decreases your marginal cost. Each additional worker gets cheaper and cheaper. They can make more t-shirts for you. Or if there's a per unit subsidy, meaning every time you produce a hat, we'll give you $1. What would you do? You produce more hats, right? Understand per unit changes things. The example I used a couple weeks ago was if I told you guys that day one, the very first video I did, all right, I'm going to give you guys $100. Here you go, watch them. There's no incentive after the third one to keep watching. If I said there's 20 videos, every time you come, I'll give you $5. Now you know I want to get $5. I got to watch the whole thing. I can't watch 8 minutes of this. I got to watch all 35 minutes of this thing. And then you'll get your $5. That means the output, how much production, how many of you would watch each day would increase, because at the margin you want that, right? And then important, man, star this, write this, fixed costs do not change marginal cost, nor do something called a lump sum tax, which is a one-time tax. So once again, I give you a lump sum subsidy, $100. There's no incentive you've gotten it. Doesn't matter if you watch all 20. I'm just saying here, watch all 20. It's not going to affect you at the margin. So fixed costs don't affect marginal costs, variable costs do. And lump sum taxes and subsidies don't affect marginal cost, but per unit tax and subsidies do. I know, trust me. This is not the most exciting thing to learn. I'm well aware. You guys know that econ is one of the most failed required classes in college, has been for a long time. But the other side of the coin is for the last like 15 years, economics is one of the fastest, for a number of years, it was the fastest growing major. Why is that? Because people realize the relevance, the importance. But the other side is people see things like this and they're like variable and marginal and curves, and it's not tricky. If you learn the shapes of these things, it all just makes sense. So we have two free response. Since you have a long weekend, I will leave you with one. I know it's Friday, but since most of you are watching these taped anyways, you don't really care what day it is. So why don't I do this one with you guys? And then I'll just leave you there when we'll be done and we'll jet. Maybe I'll go sledding out here in Michigan or something. So table above gives you the short-run marginal revenue product of labor. Going back to unit 5, marginal revenue product. That is our demand for labor, the additional revenue each additional worker makes me. Okay, so calculate the marginal physical product. Now, if you say to yourself, see, we didn't talk about this. Sure, we did. Marginal product, marginal physical product, what I can tangibly touch. Okay, it's what I'm making. So don't get confused. This is marginal product. So how do I do this? Well, if you guys remember something here, which is that marginal revenue product is simply your marginal product times your price, and they just gave you the price of $5. Then how do you get marginal product? Because we're doing this backwards now. Usually they give you the marginal product column or the total product column. Then you have to get a marginal product. Then you have to multiply times the price to get marginal revenue product. They've already done that for you. So we just have to reverse it. So it's going to be MRP divided by price. Nothing tricky, right? Easy stuff. So go down. 450 divided by 5 is 90. 500 divided by 5 is 100, and so on and so forth. So A, calculate the marginal product of the third worker. Well, like I told you yesterday, if you guys go ahead and you do these, you draw these already, these like over here, the marginal product, then you don't have to go back. You're done. So A, calculate the marginal product of the third worker, 90. B, define the law of diminishing marginal returns. So this is what we talked about a few minutes ago. If at least one input is held fixed, while other inputs are variable, output increases at a decreasing rate. Output increases at a decreasing rate. Easy definition. Explain why it occurs. Now that's a little bit trickier, right? So the example I used was, right, you get all those workers trying to get potatoes, there's really nothing for them to do. Well, that's not a good explanation for you on the AP test. What you'd want to say is, there's a over-reliance on fixed resources, or it's because things are being held fixed, and there's not enough for the workers, okay? So understand that. So if I wanted people to pick more potatoes, what would I do? I'd give them more pitchforks. Problem solved. Now everyone runs out, digs up their own potato, and I can harvest more potatoes, okay? So there's an overusing of a fixed input. See which worker, okay? First worker makes me an additional 90. Second worker makes me an additional 100. And then the third worker only makes me 90 again. So with the addition of the third worker would be the answer because they only made me 90. The second worker made me 100. So that's easy. Once again, I'm just looking at that chart. D, what is the highest wage? Okay, so all you have to remember, going all the way back to unit 5, you hire where up to the point, okay, you hire all the way up to that point at the margin where wage equals marginal revenue product. I will tell you right now, every year kids think, how do we know how to do this? It can't be that easy. It's that easy. If they told you the fifth worker, their marginal revenue product is $300, that means if I hire the fifth worker, they're going to make me an additional $500. Guess what I'm willing to do? Pay them up to $500, but not anything more. I'm willing to do that because at the margin, I want to go from the fourth worker who's making me an additional 4, and I want to collect that money that person's going to make me $500. I don't want to not hire that person. So the answer is highest daily wage for the fifth worker, $300. There it is right there. Okay, they're going to make me an additional 300. Sorry if I said 5, I was looking at the wrong number. So they're going to make me that. And then E, what will happen to demand for labor if the price of the product increases? Once again, little note for you here. Oops. Demand for labor is MRP. MRP is defined as where marginal product times price. If the price increases, MRP must increase. And if MRP is my demand for labor, I must hire more workers. So the explanation is because it would drive up the demand for labor. Okay, it would increase your MRP, which is your demand for labor. So I'd hire more workers. Friday afternoon. What do you guys think? Hopefully that was enough explanation for you today with cost curves. Give you a couple days to let that sink in. Here's what I want you guys to do, because it's only A through D on this thing. So it's fairly easy. I want you guys to go ahead and pause this when we're done. Just flip back to it real quick and get it done now. And then Monday at 3 o'clock, we're going to go over this and we'll get through the answers. And I think you guys will have no problems at all. So here we are. You guys have a fine, that's it. Last one. Take your time, go back, look this thing over, take a few minutes. And then once again, device issues, let them know. And I hope you guys all have a good weekend. Stay healthy out there. And I look forward to seeing you guys again on Monday. Take care of yourselves. Adios.